It's time for another episode of Evolve Sales Live. Welcome back. I'm Jonathan Fisher, your host. Well, it's an exciting time to be a company founder, and it's no secret that many of this show's listeners are either company founders or have a key role in a startup of some kind. When new companies succeed, it makes the headlines, but some of the best insights can be had from the failures and mistakes that led to that success. Today, we're going to explore some of those insights with a panel of highly successful company founders. Joining us from the Big Apple is Lavie Popack, founder of Overpass.com. Overpass is a unique solution for hiring pre-vetted remote talent very quickly and affordably. Hiring managers can open a free account, view profile CVs, listen to voice samples, and filter by industry and experience. Overpass makes it possible to interview, hire, and begin onboarding process in a matter of days instead of weeks. Next up in our panel is Kris Rudeegraap, coming to us from San Francisco. Kris Rudeegraap is the CEO and co-founder of Sendoso.com. Sendoso helps companies stand out by giving them new ways to engage with customers throughout the buyer's journey. They're backed by $152 million venture funding. They've got a global footprint with a presence in North America, Europe, and Asia Pacific. And coming to us from Motor City is James Chapman. James is the founder of the networking app Plainsight.app. Plainsight takes the work out of networking. Business people can find upcoming events, remote spaces to work, and make new connections based on mutual interest. Connections are curated and made online or in person based on their individual skills, goals, interests, and professions. Hey, all of you gentlemen, fantastic to have you on the panel. We're excited to do our very first panel discussion on Remote Sales Live. Welcome to you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so we had polled each of our panelists ahead of today's show to hear what were some of the key mistakes. What are some of the key things to not do when founding a business? And they broke down into some subject areas. And so just kind of leading off with, in no particular order, there are a lot of mistakes you can make when it comes to bringing in the first initial hires into your company. Hiring errors was a big theme. And so maybe we can kind of sound off. One of you gentlemen just trying to kind of chime in here. What are some of the mistakes you personally made in terms of hiring?
I can kick this one off. I think when it comes to hiring, we usually hire people that we like, right? That we feel like we can relate to, maybe even trust. And that makes firing them much harder because you've hired somebody because they're qualified and you like them initially. And so when you start to realize that they aren't quite a fit, you tend to try to hold on to them longer than you probably should. You think about it just like a romantic relationship, right? Like you built all these things with this person, but you find out at some point, and it's usually after about 3 months, they're like, oh my God, I don't like the first red flag usually pops up in about 3 months in both business and personal relationships, romantic relationships.
Yeah.
And I just think it's a habit for some founders, especially in the early stages, to hold on to those people too long. But the thing about it is that could be very business critical because every single person matters when you're a small team, and you can't hide, right? And so the other teammates are also going to notice at some point that this is a person who probably shouldn't be on the team. And so I've got stories for sure on hiring people who just aren't a fit. I think we all do. But I think the lesson to be learned there is the timing on the firing piece and the separation.
Makes a lot of sense, James. I saw Kris nodding his head knowingly.
Yeah, I can relate to that too. And just, I think like James said, it's often easier to hire people in the early days. And sometimes it's way better to go out and spend the extra effort recruiting people. And so the relationship starts off on the right foot. I had a couple of the things to add to that, though. One is related to when you're going out and hiring your first SDR or AE, I think the tendency is to kind of crawl before you run and maybe just hire one person. But you can often have some bias there where if you hire a bad first sales rep, you might not be sure if it's whether the sales rep's actually bad or if like the product market fit and your go-to-market motion is bad. And so I always recommend now to early stage entrepreneurs and founders to hire in pairs, whether that's 2 SDRs or 2 AEs. And so one, they can learn from each other, compete against each other, because sales is oftentimes better when you're competing. But then you can also learn and make sure that you're not having an individual that creates a bias for your product market fit.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a great insight to hire 2 people. Would you unpack that further, Kris? Like, what are some of the advantages of hiring them in pairs?
Yeah, well, aside from the competitive nature of hiring in pairs and being able to understand the unbiased of one person doing bad and the other person doing good, and so you can really understand better that way. You also can help build out your enablement or your training in the early days too. So get people to start at the same time and make sure that they're off to the races at the same time too.
Yeah, I love that. Maybe you're splitting your risk a little bit too, right? You need that function filled. At least you'll have the one person a little more likely than, instead of being pass fail. Lavie, what are some of your insights in this area? You've been hiring people, and that's actually what Overpass does, is help other companies hire
absolutely.
people.
It's funny when Kris brought that up. I know you weren't like trained into like saying that or prior to getting onto this call or onto this meet, but that's exactly what we tell our clients. It's you want to hire in pairs. You want to also reduce down that risk. So like you said, if one person doesn't work out, then at least you took the time, and you need to take that time upfront to invest and train people properly when you bring them on. And I think that's where a lot of people fail, is thinking that they're going to bring on salespeople and not invest in them upfront. And then if you don't invest, obviously it's there's problems that come along with that. But so you need to invest. But then when you're going to invest, you want to invest with more than one person, with multiple people. So that way you're training a full team, and then there's also like collaboration around that, and you could really get moving in that way. But one other thing I wanted to add, and something that I personally went through starting MPower Energy prior to starting up Overpass, is getting in. I think a lot of founders go through this. Is you move into a company and you think about what's going to happen. What are the needs that are coming up? What is this company going to look like? What are the different departments within the company? And then you start hiring for what you think is going to happen, for the problems that you think that you're going to experience.
Hmm.
And you end up just hiring way too quick. And you have a bunch of people just sitting around not doing very much. But then on the other hand, you have lots of problems and challenges that pile on, and now you're having to like divvy out these different tasks or challenges to the few people that you do have in a company. So it's a fine balance between the need, the challenge, the problem, and filling it with with the right employees. So I think early on that's definitely something that a lot of founders, a lot of startups go through. So especially like when you have tons of capital coming your way, you're like, I have all this money now. We need to build out all these different departments because that we're gonna have all these different needs in the company, and now you have the money to throw at it. So you got to just be like very reluctant in doing that. Yeah.
One thing I'd say on top of that too, on the other side of that, is if you can't afford to hire 2 people, or you're not sure who's the next person to hire, I would say don't hesitate to use like Upwork or freelancers as much as possible, so that you can still make sure that you don't hire someone and they don't have anything to do. So I think as an early stage founder, Upwork can be your best friend.
Yeah,
I,
absolutely. On the
I agree with that, and then it also allows you. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. You got it, James.
Oh no, I was just gonna say it gives you the opportunity to try them out too, right? Like when you onboard somebody initially through contract, as opposed to just bringing them on full time, right out of the gate. You can work with them a little bit. You can give them a little bit more flexibility, see how you both work together, and then it's much easier to part ways if need be. But that's the only thing I was gonna add.
Yeah. I totally agree. I think for developers and copywriters and designers of that nature, I definitely agree with you on that, Kris. I find that when it comes to salespeople, a lot of our clients actually come to us specifically for that reason, because they want to kind of test things out and pilot it, and without like putting in much risk. At the same time, though, you have to ensure you train them properly. So if you're going to come in and be like, okay, maybe I want to hire for 10 hours a week or 20 hours a week and test out the waters, and things go really well, then we're going to scale it up. So yeah, you definitely have that ability to do that when you're working with a remote model, when you're working with like a sales talent marketplace.
Yeah, really good input, guys. Back to the earlier note too of not necessarily hiring friends and family. Had a nice comment from the audience today. Come on, man, have a family. Like that's what you hear from people, right? They want to get a job because they know you. And the gentleman here, Michael, made the comment: "Closeness breeds contempt." It's kind of harsh, but I think it's a very real thing. You're seeing a certain side of folks that are in your personal circle, and you're rarely going to be able to, in an objective way, vet them properly to bring them into your company. I've seen this even with partnerships, where it does not work out well at all. And Kris, I think you broke a rule in that, right? You partnered up with a friend, and it worked out, but don't do that again, okay?
I did. I will say, though, one other thing is, when you're a very young founder, or maybe you're graduating from college, you're like, I want to start a company right now. I do think there is some advantages to going out in the workforce, working at other companies, and building a network. Maybe they're not your best friends, but you have colleagues that you've worked with before that you can hit up for roles. And so that was similar to my story, where I spent about 8 years working in other companies. And when I went to start Sendoso, our first sales rep came from the last company I worked at, and we were friends per se. We weren't like besties, but we became more friends as we worked together. But it was easy to have that network to pull from. And so I think some entrepreneurs are antsy right out the gate, right after college, say, I need to start something right now. But there is some advantages to building your network in the professional career that you can then use for a hiring pool when you do start a company.
That makes so much sense, because now you're not basing it on the friendship first. It's actually more of an actual curated network. So you are seeing what they can do in the workplace. Now that makes sense. James, you want to chat in there?
Yeah, I was going to add something to what Kris on even the fundraising side of things, right? I think it can be a good idea to go and work at a VC or at a venture studio or something of that nature, so that you can really get a good understanding of the jargon, what investors are looking for, and you get a chance to see some of these other deals and things of that nature. That has worked out very well for me, being able to work with Dan Gilbert's family office in the past and just learn all of the things about VC and investing before actually jumping out there to start my own thing and building those relationships and that network at the same time.
Yeah, I love that, James. If I could, I want to go ahead and take that as a segue and move to the next common theme that came in the polling, and that is sort of your personal development as a leader. As a founder, you go through your own series of stages and development as you're growing your company. And I know some of the lessons learned come from that series of lessons learned and then applied. So maybe we can kind of go through that. How have you had to change as a company founder? And we have an interesting spread here, because we've got Lavie, who's actually founded a couple of different companies and probably has a little bit longer tenure. Then Kris is kind of in the middle, and James is kind of newer. So each of you are right on the panel at a little different stage of the game. So maybe we could kind of start with our senior, Lavie, member of the team in that regard, and share some of the lessons you've learned and how you've had to maybe modify and grow as a leader, or maybe some specific errors that you made early on in your management of your company.
Yeah, sure. Just before we jump in that, but I have one of my best friends, and I have two of my brother-in-laws working with me between MPower and Overpass, and I love them. They're great. It's been nothing but amazing. So I definitely think you have to be very cautious in who you select in terms of like family and friends. But I do think that like it can work out really well.
Lavie, you just have a better set of family and friends than the rest of us. That's what that tells us right now. But
yeah. So personal development. I mean, where do I begin, right? So I would say a couple of things. First of all, like I've learned to learn, right? I've learned to think about like what is the biggest pain point that like is keeping me up at night. Because I think the issue is not so much a matter of solving the problem; it's about knowing what the problem is. And there's so many things coming at you at one time throughout the day, nonstop. So when you to take a few moments, meditate. I mean, I would love to I don't meditate much, but I should meditate. But like meditate a little bit upon like what is that like top level challenge or problem that like it's kind of lingering for a while, maybe weeks, maybe months, but like you haven't really been doing much about it, and then hone in on that and explore it. And when I say explore it, I mean learn. Like, pick up a book, podcast, whatever it might be, and just master that specific niche area of that challenge. So it might be even a podcast, right? Like, you go to market strategy. Yes, I want to, develop a podcast or a live event or community. Like, what do I know about communities? What do I know about podcasts? Well, there's tons and tons of content out there. You spend a couple of weeks, and cover as much as you can, and then you bring in some of the subject matter experts, some of the consultants that you then work together with. You don't just hire without really knowing much yourself. So that's one area that I've been working on for a couple of years now, is just really honing in on my personal area of weakness that kind of connects with the biggest problem that I'm experiencing at the time. So earlier on, it was actually marketing, because my background, originally it's from real estate. Then from real estate, I entered into the energy business. And in the retail energy business, it's the old school way of selling, which is door knocking. And door knocking is the furthest thing from like brand awareness, right? From like from like marketing. So I'm thinking I'm going to come into build a tech company. I'm going to knock on people's doors physically. That's not going to happen.
Right.
So now you have to understand, like, okay, what is going to happen? What should that go to market strategy be? So you now have to pick up that discipline and understand the different areas, the facets of product marketing and brand marketing and awareness and content strategy and podcast and community and all these amazing things that 20 years ago they didn't really have much of any of that. So and that's really like I'm essentially, even though like yes, I'm officially my title CEO, but like 90% of my time I work in marketing.
Mm-hmm.
And sales as well, but I would say more on the marketing side. So and it's not because I love it. I actually got to enjoy it, but it's more because that's what the need is, and it's what I realize that I have to master in order for the company to move, take off and move to the next level.
I think that's a common theme in many of the more successful companies out there, and even some of the company turnarounds, is because the head took that bull by the horns. So, Chief Learner, one of the hats that you should be wearing, sounds like, Lavie. What are some additional lessons that you've learned, Kris, in your growth of your startup over these last half dozen years or so?
Yeah, so I'd say a couple things. One is, in the early days of founding the company, as like the CEO founder, you're helping everyone. Everyone kind of knows you. But once you get hundreds and hundreds of employees, I think employees can start getting intimidated by the CEO at times. And so I've had to change the way I've acted a bit, because just popping on a calendar invite over to another employee when we have 500 employees and they've never met me can come across a bit different. And so I've had to kind of change the way that I interact with other employees to still keep my very hands-on mentality, which I like to get in the weeds. I like to, make myself available to every and anyone at the company. And so I think that's something important, is how are you perceived as the CEO as you grow from a small seed stage company into a Series C and beyond. So that's one thing. I also think, like, as the founder, you kind of are the culture of the company. And so you have to be very apparent in what you do and what you don't do. And you're very much a public figure to the company all the time. And so I think you have to be like overly aware of that and make sure that your actions are leading to the company culture that you want to build. I think that's important too.
Love that.
Yeah, I love that, Kris. That takes a lot of commitment on your part as well, as the head. You have to really see that as core to your own mission, and act on that on. It sounds like in your case a daily basis. So that's admirable, by the way. James, rotating to you. So you're earliest on in your journey as a founder. What are some early lessons that you have learned?
Get the hell out of the way of my team. Like that's been one of the biggest things that I've struggled with. I mean, just to be completely honest with it, right? Like I can be a bottleneck, but it's my baby, and I'm passionate about it, and I love it, and I'm breathing it, right, and all of the things. And my way is not always the best way. Oftentimes, my way is not the best way. And I think that just being able to let go as a founder and as a CEO so that your team can be able to have ownership over everything that you all are doing. Because at the end of the day, the business is only going to go as far as the team, right? Like we, as the leaders of these businesses, we have the vision. We're going to be able to give the directions and things of that nature and keep everybody on track and be the ones who are going to decide how time is being spent and how money is being spent. But at the end of the day, your team is the one who's actually out there doing it. And so that's been the biggest and the most challenging lesson for me is just get out of the way, trust your team. Don't feel like you have to oversee every single thing. Like those are some of the challenges that I've had. And I've seen myself grow in those areas and just being more transparent with my team and allowing them to own things and allowing them to make mistakes and understanding that it's okay if they make certain mistakes that I would not have made had I done it right. It has to be some type of trajectory there with their progress, and you have to allow for that.
Yeah, I love that. That sounds like a pretty prescient insight for you to have this early on in the growth of your company. What are some of the key ways to all of the panelists that a CEO can actually get in their own way? I think that's a great topic.
Yeah, I'll kick it off there. One of the areas that I think in the early stage, as it relates to sales, is I think founder-led sales can last too long, and you can overly focus on, I'm going to keep doing sales. I don't need to hire people. And you can see some really false positives with product market fit. So my suggestion is instead hire sales ASAP to ensure you have a good go-to-market fit, because I think the passion of a founder can be harder to replicate with a stranger. So, and I think that goes with other roles too, where in the early stage you try to do too many things. And back to James's point, just get the heck out of the way. And you've hired smart people to do things, and let them do their best work.
Yeah, good stuff, Kris.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And then in addition, as I was saying before, you kind of like don't want to hire prematurely. So you kind of step into that role yourself initially. So like for right now, for me, a lot of it's on the marketing side. And then I think, we could tend to just stay in that role too long. So, the process I see is like move into it, master it, make sure it's like a well-oiled machine, then move out of it and let the right person move in. And I'm sure they could do a better job than I can. So you want to, I see that as a great system, a great process, but you don't want to be in that, doing that too long. And I find myself personally that I have done things, I have done that, too long, or I've stayed in those roles too long. But it's also an emotional attachment. You're in it, you're doing it, you're dealing in the weeds. Not to say that I think I could do it better than some other marketing gurus that have been doing it for 10 years, but it's your baby.
Yeah, for sure. James, what are some other ways that a CEO can get in his or her own way?
Yeah, I and I also, after I give my answer, I see a question that Lindy just popped up that I would also like to get into too. But I think another way that we can get into our own way around the product. Like the thing about your product road mapping and things of that nature, good products and great products are fairly often built by committee. And it takes somebody to just like own it and give the direction of those things. But I found myself getting in my own way when it comes to the product at times too, because I think that I have spent far too much time in the weeds on the product and different product features and things of that nature. But when you find something that's working with your product, now it's just time to like let that thing breathe and then move on to sales. And then it then starts shifting to marketing. And a task too long is one of the ways that we can get in our own way as well. And I think maybe Lavie touched on that as well.
James, you keep pitching me perfect segues. I really appreciate you for that, because I want to talk about product and product development as our next topic. Before we do that, though, just a quick friendly reminder to the audience, we've got a live Q&A upcoming. We definitely want to allow sort of some free-floating, whatever, stream of consciousness, ask me anything energy at the end of our conversation here. So go ahead and begin posting some of those questions. I already know that James wants to get to one of those from Lindy, one of our audience members. So we'll get to that here in just a few more moments. So let's go ahead and jump in then. So, what are some of the key mistakes that can be made in terms of your product? We've actually discussed this with some of the other guests on the show before, where how do you even know what your market is going to need? You build a fancy widget, or you have a solution or a platform, whatever it might be. What's the interaction there? And maybe it's best to talk about it in terms of before, during, and maybe thereafter when it comes to product. So if you guys want to chime in on that topic.
Sure. I can chime in on a couple things. So one, I think in the very, very early days when you're trying to launch your first product, I think it's important not to feature creep and spend too long hiding in stealth mode.
Okay.
I always suggest to the founders, like, get it out there as quick as possible, and not too quick, but way quicker than most founders think that it needs to be so perfect. Get it out there and then start talking to customers. And so I think that's the second part of it is, as a founder and as a CEO, you should always be talking to customers. Even as you grow and scale and you're no longer doing sales, you're no longer doing customer success. I am a huge believer in talking to customers as much as you can. I do a annual customer roadshow where I talk to 1 to 200 customers a year, purposefully around certain topics like our upcoming roadmap and our historical releases. And I think that is just so crucial to figuring out the direction and or other parts of the business like pricing model, product marketing, etc.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I saw James nodding his head with a lot of energy there about let's get the thing moving, right? There's something about momentum. Why don't you unpack further, James?
Yeah, I mean, once you take someone else's money, the clock starts, right? And so like you gotta go, and just sitting on product features for too long can really hurt the business, and you can see money just start to be shipped out the window, and I think that your product roadmap, especially in the early days, should be heavily based upon your business model, right? Like we could come up with different features all day, but what's your core business model? What's going to be driving revenue? It doesn't have to look perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect. It needs to work. The functionality needs to exist. You need to be able to, get the payments in and all of that type of stuff, and make sure that the services are being rendered. But I do think that founders can oftentimes go product crazy and go feature crazy, and that just takes way too much time, and it is way too expensive, of a task to be able to do. I've experienced it, especially if you're in the consumer side of things, right? But because when you're building things for consumers, things are constantly changing and all of that type of stuff. And so it can be really easy to get into a feature heavy business. And so I 100% agree with Kris. I think just ship the damn thing, get it out there, test it, learn, and then go back to the drawing board. It doesn't have to be perfect right out of the gate because clock's ticking.
Yeah, love it. Got to get that business rolling. Lavie, you've had different evolutions and iterations with your offering. Tell us about that journey.
Sure. So first of all, I definitely echo Kris and James. One thing to add to that is, like, who am I building this for? So it's not just any customer to speak to. It's extremely important to know who I'm building this for, and set up an environment where you could constantly be learning from them. And there's a couple different channels, and it really depends on what stage you're holding within the company. But there's a couple different ways of, like, constantly learning from those specific customers. And whether it's going to be direct customer interviews, Kris mentioned roadshow. Obviously, there's some really great technology out there, like a Gong or Chorus, where you could, like, dive into, like, specific customers, like conversations they're having with your sales reps, and then community as well. And that's something we're actively working towards, is to build out our community, and invite only, and make sure you only allow in your ideal customer profile, because you don't want to be learning from the wrong types of customers.
Mm.
I think that's where a lot of companies go wrong, because otherwise you're getting, like, tons of just mixed information from different types of personas, and you're like, okay, what direction should I be going? This person wants that person wants that. What am I doing here? So it's it's a little tough, because it's, like, counterintuitive, and upfront you just want to kind of sell to everybody, and you want to learn from everybody.
Yeah.
That's just and it's also part ego. It's like because you have such a large TAM, and you're like, look at this massive audience I could sell to, but no, like you got to like pull yourself back. Like, this is who I'm building it for. Yes, maybe we'll sell to all those other people eventually, sure, but I don't want to learn from them right now. I don't want to like, I'll speak to them, sure, because I'm a nice guy, but I don't want to learn from them. And I don't want to like focus my energies in targeting them and bringing them on as customers either.
Man, it makes so much sense. You're gathering a lot of data, but it's very targeted. And that takes a lot of focus, and it's not easy to do that because, especially early on, right? I mean, you're trying to generate revenue, you're trying to get a customer, so it takes tremendous discipline and, as James said, commitment to your business model to really push that forward.
Yeah, and you're gonna get all different types of customers come through potentially, right? It's word of mouth. Like, your ideal customer is not going to only have friends that are your ideal customer, right?
Yeah.
So they're going to refer other people, and so, but the idea is that in terms of like a targeted and focused effort should be specifically towards the ideal customer profile. And then in addition to that, when you set up your learning system, right, your feedback system to learn from your customers, ensure that it's the right customers you're learning from.
Yeah, love that. So everyone does go through iterations, and as we learn more about our market, we see additional opportunities to add a feature or a benefit or add an additional service. What are our recommendations, panelists, on how to proceed?
I'll chime in first there. So I think it's always important to keep a roadmap and also a backlog of all the potential features you could and couldn't do. I think that's important, so it's somewhere, it's locked away, you can get to it. I think it's important to kind of stay on path as much as you can. There's going to be lots of shiny objects that come your way. You don't always want to appease the loudest customer. I think that often happens where you have some loud customer who might churn, who's telling you to build this, but your 50 other customers are not asking about that feature. And so I think you've got to be very focused on making sure you're putting the right research in, and knowing when to say no and not building things is just as important as knowing what to build next.
Makes a world of sense. I see a lot of nodding heads from the other panelists. What are some other key ways that you can know that you should move forward with developing an additional feature, benefit, or offering? Anyone else? Yeah, go ahead, James.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think the most of it is the testing, and once you do your testing and you figure out how this is going to add to the bottom line, or what is going to change about the business once you add this particular feature, then you know how best to move forward. Sometimes, and I've been guilty of this, we may build things that we would necessarily want to see, or we may build for that loud customer. But really, the question you should be asking yourself is, once we make this change to the product, how is it going to add to the bottom line? Or how is it going to increase our users? Or how is it going to increase, like what's going to be what is tangibly going to change after we add this next product feature? And that is not a fun process. That is a lot of research. That is a lot of just like getting in there and asking some really tough questions. But I've told my team now, like, before you bring me a product idea, like, you're gonna have to show me in a tangible way how this is going to be able to benefit the business. Because if not, then we aren't gonna move forward with it, because it's too easy to fall in love with cool features and
Right.
things of that nature. And honestly, it starts to make the product a little confusing. Like, you don't know it, but over time you look up and you're like, damn, we've added like all of these different features, and I'm getting confused. Like, what is it? What is all of this? You know what I mean? So
Right.
you don't have to build just to build.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Earlier we were definitely plagued with this issue as well. Just like building out a bunch of stuff because it's cool, and like, I like cool stuff. I like cool features, and it's a lot of fun when you're like sitting in a conference room, like talking it out, and like, but in reality, the way I see it, it's like it's reactive stuff and then it's proactive stuff, right? It's like, like you said, billing is not coming through. Like, we got to get paid, or customers are upset about something. So there's just like things aren't happening the way they should. So we're getting there. It's like very obvious that we're having some pain points around that. So that's stuff that's like priority. We got to deal with that. Right.
Yeah.
So, and we have to build some features to ensure that, things are smooth. Okay. Now it's like, okay, things are quiet. There's no noise around me. Okay. What do we do next? Right. Now that we're in a quiet room, Well, to James's point, like, yeah, that's going to be a matter of what are we trying to do here? I think we're trying to grow customers. I think we're trying to grow revenue. Well, okay, so like, how do we do that? Well, we do that by, we have flows coming through our platform. Well, let's see. I mean, what are our conversion rates from this point to this point, and then to the next point? How can we improve in those conversion rates? And then that's one aspect of it. And then there's the other aspect of just like, what is the actual tangible value that we're providing as part of our service, and then how can we improve on that? So, and then as part of that, it's again matter of learning from your customers. Like, what are the things that are top of mind from them? What are the things that they'll be happy to like buy into additionally, or what are the things that they're constantly asking for? So as long as you set up that feedback cycle through with your customer base, then you'll start to hear like things that are top of mind in terms of the features that you should be focusing on to offer up that additional value.
Makes a lot of sense. And one thing I've heard from a lot of founders too is if there's not already other solutions available, there may be a reason. So you might want to really slow yourself down a little bit before you put a lot of money and resources into something. And I wonder what you gentlemen think of the idea of doing some internal focus group work with certain features and benefits, if that could be done, right? If it's something that would be comparatively simple to do in a beta form, and maybe use some of your customers as a test base, maybe if that is that a workable solution in certain circumstances as you guys would see it?
For sure, I think you need to do that. I mean, we have a customer advisory board or a cab that will have a product council meeting and talk about features like that. We have some releases that only internal users see first. And we also will reach out and find beta users, and we have now where we have the luxury of having user research team. But in the early days, I think product managers, engineers, founders, everyone, sales reps would pitch in and be a part of that group.
Good stuff. Well, guys, next I want to move into the next topic area, which is funding. Now, this is an interesting area because so many of the players in this space are all about getting the funding, right? It's getting to that next round, and it can play a role in helping keep you targeted. It also plays a role in how you have to budget and how you have to grow your company. And I know there's some differences of opinion among founders as to how best or even if one should use funding in certain circumstances. So why don't we start off? Let's go reverse order. Let's start with our youngest member of the team in terms of founding companies. And James, tell us what your experience has been in terms of venture capital. How have you used it? First of all, will be a great question to have you sound off on. And how do you feel about it philosophically? Maybe you have some insights from mentors, for example, you can share with us.
So I'll start from a philosophical standpoint. I don't like to raise money that I don't need. So I try to look at where am I going to be using this money? How am I going to be using this money? Because once that equity is gone, it's gone. So that's the first thing I'll say. The second thing is I've been extremely fortunate because we have raised over $1 million in funding for Plain Sight in a pre-seed stage. That's not always the easiest thing to do, and it's especially not always the easiest thing to do for diverse founders who may not necessarily have the best network, right? And so there's a lot of challenges that come along with that. But I would have capital, and I try to make sure that before we go out knocking on doors, even asking for money, there's going to be some type of growth that's going to be projected there, right? And so it's like the question that you really need to ask yourself is, once I take on this money and the clock then starts, how am I going to be able to turn this money that is going to be leading me into the next round of funding or leading me to getting closer to my exit strategy or whatever the end game is for you? I'm not, I think that founders have fallen in love with raising money because that's, when you see an article in TechCrunch or any of these other publications, that's the thing that they talk about. X company has raised Y amount of dollars, and it's easy to fall in love with that, and it's easy to fall in love with fundraising. But honestly, a lot of companies don't even need to take on venture capital, right? And so like, you really need to get a good understanding of what it is you're building, who you're building it for. Do you need venture capital, and what do you feel like you need it for? Because venture capital is for growth, right? Like they are not around to try to help you find product market fit. They are not around to try to help you sustain your business or any of that type of stuff. And so like those, you got to get the myths out of the door first. And I've been a very naive entrepreneur in the early days, and it's hard to, it's easy to fall into some of those traps. But I try to keep a very old school philosophy, and just don't take on money that you don't need.
That makes a world of sense. I think I'd like to revert over to the king of capital in today's panel, though, and that would be Kris. Inarguably, at well over 150 million in venture capital raised, and that may be dated information. I think you had another round maybe since that was last published. So I still suspect, though, that you probably would agree with what James just said. Kris, talk to us about your use of capital.
Yeah, I mean, hitting on James' point of like when to raise, I think that's important, or when not to raise. I think for us in the very early days, before we even raised our first dollar of capital, we tried to get out there, build a product, bootstrap as long as we could. And we almost hit a point where we were having so much demand that it was hard for us to keep up with our customers, keep up with the inbound leads, keep up with everything. And so we said, hey, venture capital is actually going to be a good tool for us to grow the business a bit faster and to keep up with the demand, rather than kind of halting growth. So I'd say that's important. But then I say when even before you decide if and when, I think it's important to understand, different ways that you can raise money. I've talked to, very early stage, founders who are trying to raise a priced seed round right out the gate and didn't know that a safer convertible note was an option. And what were the advantages of that versus a priced round? And so I think you want to educate yourself, read some books, read some blogs on everything fundraising related, and you'll help yourself a lot there. And then the last piece I think is I've talked to other founders where they feel like they get a term sheet and it's go time. I got to sign this, and the VCs are dictating everything. I think as a founder, you should be confident in negotiating and know when to turn down a term sheet. And so I think that's a really important part too, is being confident in negotiating term sheets.
And Kris, if I may, one thing I really respect about your use of capital is you created value first, and you used the capital for leverage to go and get the market so you could offer more of that same value.
Yeah.
I do think there's a big trend right now in the space of playing the capital game and basically just inflating a market share to get capital, which is not the same thing as creating value. So my hat's off to you for doing it, to my humble view, the right way. So let's rotate around to Lavie, who has maybe a contrarian view on capital, ironically, given our show's audience. But Lavie, talk to us about your relationship with capital and business founding.
Sure. So we haven't raised. We're internally funded, and I definitely agree with Kris in terms of if you're at a point where you can't meet demand, and the only way to meet demand is by going out and raising capital, then that makes a lot of sense. My biggest issue with raising capital is it doesn't necessarily align with what the company actually needs to service your customers in the best way, and to do the things that will keep the company healthy for short term and long term. That's my biggest concern, because obviously the VCs that are investing, they're looking, they're very metric driven. And sometimes you have to do things within the organization that aren't going to hit the metrics that the VCs are looking for, but it's the best thing for the organization. So that's really my primary concern. I've been fortunate enough to not have to go out and raise. Potentially down the line we will be looking to raise, but at this point we're not looking for it. And like I said, if I don't have to, I'm not going to, because of that concern.
Well, I love it. There's wisdom in all these views here today. So great insights, panelists. I appreciate what you brought to the table. At this point, I think it's time for us to revert over to some Q&A. We've had some really interesting questions come in from our listening audience, and in no particular order, from Lindy, I think this may be the question James had spotted earlier. When you first started your company, did you have the same vision for it that you do now? And if not, why has that initial vision shifted? Great question.
Yeah, I just liked it because we started our platform for improving the way in-person connections are made 4 months before the start of a global pandemic, right? And so we've actually been, our startup has been in the pandemic longer than it has not been. And so a lot of things have shifted, a lot of things have pivoted, but what I am very proud of our team about, first and foremost, is our resilience to be able to stick in there, and then also us having the courage to pivot back to some of the original lines of thinking that we were wanting to do, but in a different way. And so I think in the beginning we were very focused on the consumer side of things, how the folks who are going to be downloading the app connections and find events and things of that nature. But what I found is I'm focusing almost all of my time these days on the B2B side of the platform, which is helping those event hosts be able to find brand sponsors, helping those brand sponsors be able to find the right events. There's a ton of upside from a revenue standpoint, from that aspect. And so we've been through a lot, and I've just learned a lot and seen a lot. And I think we've seen the product grow and change a lot. And so, my advice as an early stage founder to any of the other founders out there is just be resilient as you possibly can, and really believe and trust your gut and trust in your vision, because there's it's not over until you quit. And we've basically had every single reason to give up and to quit. Like almost all of our investors who gave us that $1 million, right before the pandemic, they were just kind of like, while we're all afraid of our groceries, they were just kind of like, it's okay. You don't have to continue to try to do this. Like we get it and understand, but we're a really stubborn bunch, and just decided not to quit. And so when I saw that question, it just really stuck, hit home on some of my own personal experiences.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Kris, has your vision evolved very much, or has it stayed fairly true?
So our vision has stayed fairly true since day one, but I'd say parts of the business have evolved, and/or we've had to be agile. So similar to James, we were sending direct mail and gifts a lot of times to people's offices, and so when COVID hit, we had to kind of pivot into this new features to send to people's homes, and also create a lot of thought leadership for sales and marketing and CX leaders in terms of how do they react to COVID and how does their go-to-market plans change. And so I think being agile, not only in your vision, but your core product functionality and also your thought leadership content is going to be key to just trends that are happening in the market.
Makes a lot of sense. Lavie, maybe you're in the middle somewhere. I think the vision hasn't shifted much, but there has been some evolution.
Yeah. So, starting out, the focus is, a distributed, customer engagement, all things customer engagement. And I was saying before, you need to be super, super focused, not just in terms of like your product offering, but in terms of your customer and who your customer actually is and who you're servicing. Coming from MPower Energy, going through all the pain points that I went through to putting together a distributed customer service team, sales team, quality assurance, retention, all these different types of customer engagement motions. Going into Overpass, the idea was to bring everything into one platform where any company could just tap into it and then deploy a customer engagement team. But a little, some time down the road, we kind of bring it back in and said, okay, we got to focus on one specific area, and the area that was like had the biggest pain point within the space, which was of course sales, and even more specific around the SDR role specifically. So that's kind of like I want to started like super broad around all customer engagement, and now we're like super focused around like distributed SDR role, and also even more focused around like who it is, like who's our ideal customer profile, who are we actually servicing for this ability to like quickly deploy a distributed team of SDRs. So that's kind of been like our trajectory of like starting broad, and then now we're like as focused as we could possibly be, which has been really, really great. And we're seeing it every single day in terms of like alignment across our teams and customer feedback and so on and so forth.
Yeah, excellent to hear. That makes a lot of sense. It's neat to see the evolution unfold over the history of a founder's journey with their company, I'm quite sure. So another great question from the field. Joshua would like to know, what has each of the panelists done for their very first job, and how long did you work there? So Lavie, you were just talking. Let's stay with you and tell us that.
Yeah. So what I do in my very first job, well, I got kicked out of camp when I was 14 years old, and my dad wanted to teach me a lesson, so he put me in Ace Hardware on Utica Avenue in Crown Heights. So I was on the back of a pickup truck, uh, 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 bringing sheetrock, plaster, sand, 4 to 6 flights up apartment buildings all over Crown Heights. So I did that for the summer. But yeah, that was my first job.
That sounds like a good character building job. Kris,
Yeah.
how about you? What was your first one? How long were you there?
Yeah, so my first job was at a video store back when the VHS was transitioning to DVDs, and so I did that for about 6 months. But after that, I worked at Best Buy for a couple of years, and that learned a lot about sales through working through at Best Buy.
That's pretty cool. James, how about you, brother?
Yeah, when I was 16, my first job was as a bag boy. So just bagging groceries. I used to work hard for those tips, man, like asking people if I could take their groceries out to their car and help them load them in. So, yeah, I think customer service, I learned a lot, and it was definitely a very humbling job because, the cashiers were all comfortable and that kind of stuff. And I grew up in the South. It's hot outside. You got to go outside and get those buggies and that kind of stuff. But, yeah, that was my first job, and I did that from 16 all the way to like my freshman year of college.
Yeah, the highly regarded trainer and author Chet Holmes was known to hire off of grocery lines for that reason. He would go and look for the person with hustle and offer them a job right on the spot. He did that probably a dozen or 15 times. And yeah, he probably would have hired you, James, had the generations aligned. So great questions. Let's see here. So another question from Dennis was when I hire, when I make initial hires, I try to make hires, easy for me to say, that compensate for my personal weakness. And Dennis is wondering if you gentlemen would recommend that strategy.
Yeah, I mean, I think you want to hire people that are smarter than you in areas that you're not good at. I mean, eventually, as the founder CEO, you should ultimately not be doing anything. I mean, in essence, all the important roles should be hired out by people that are better at you, and you can focus on making them better or taking, spending your time in other areas. But I think for sure, you've got to figure out when to hire the better people in the early days.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, and I think it's a matter of trying to get smart in one particular area, and then you get to the point where you think you're smart, and then you go and interview, you realize how stupid you actually are in that area. You're like, okay, this is the guy I got to hire, So the person that makes you feel stupid is the person you want to hire, but first you got to kind of elevate your knowledge a bit.
Yeah, got to be a decent conductor before you know how to hire the first chair. Karen has a great follow-up question to that, and James, you can chime in on this as well. Would you hire someone who's dependable with less experience over somebody who isn't as dependable but is an outright expert?
Give me the expert, man, all day long.
Really?
As many learning curves that we can get rid of, right? Especially or like I feel like I can work with almost anybody at this point. You know what I mean? And I'm less concerned about like the personal relationship side of things as I am just about like this person is very knowledgeable in this space and they can get things done. And so, yeah, give me the expert all day.
Okay.
I'll take the other side of that. Yeah, I would say definitely dependable and the character is huge for me. And obviously, you have to be intelligent. You have to know your space, but you don't have to be like a super expert in it. And we can always like look outside for experts and work with those experts. But if we're looking to take on employees, character, and someone that's dependable, and then I love to collaborate with the people that I work with that I directly manage, which at this point is just a lot of people. But then like what we'll do is we'll collaborate over something and be like, okay, I don't really know this thing, you don't really know this thing, okay, let's go find somebody that does. But at least we'll get down to the nitty gritty of like what it is that we don't know and who it is that we need to find together. And usually again that person's going to be like a consultant of some sort.
Yeah, and I want to change my answer now. I agree.
Okay.
Likeable than dependable, but like you have to have somebody that you can depend on. That's like by default. So yeah, I'm switching my answer.
Now, just a friendly reminder: the rules are you only get one take back. So you've used yours now, James. Kris, go ahead. You had something.
I tend to look at it from like a skill will framework, and really whether where do they sit on how skillful they are in what you're trying to hire, and where do they sit on kind of the other axes on their, their will, which is like their desire, their attitude, their confidence. And so I think in some cases, I'm happy to hire certain roles, for example, like an SDR, someone who has less skill in that category, but a ton of will. And so I think you've got to know what roles. I don't think it's a blanket statement across every role at the entire company. But I think that framework can help you pick winners.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think Lavie alluded to this too. You can hire a consultant who's a total expert, then you're not strapped down if they're less dependable, right? Best of all worlds.
Yeah, I think it also depends on what stage you're in, right, within
Yeah.
the company. Early on, you want to bring people that are just like super tapped in, they're going to show up every day and like full of energy and confident, but they might not be like have 20 years of experience doing that exact thing. And then you have to bring in a consultant, and then further down the line, like you're going to hire that consultant. And we actually did that, in the past, where we turned to a consultant, worked with that person for a couple of years, and then that person ended up coming on board full time.
Well, we're nearing the end of our time together, gentlemen. Let's wrap up with one final question from Dennis. I think it's a good place to end. What do you find most personally and professionally rewarding about your career as business founders? And let's start with James, if we could.
Yeah, I'm just super thankful that I get to wake up every day and work on something that I'm passionate about, that people find value in, and I get to do it with people and who I know that I can trust. And so, I start every morning off with gratitude, in prayer, and also in journaling and things of that nature. So there's nothing else I would rather be doing, and this is something that I can see myself doing forever. I would be doing it for free. I'm a community builder at heart, and I've built this business for folks like me, and so I think that brings me great joy and fulfillment every single day. So.
Love it. Kris, how about you? What do you find most personally rewarding?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a tie between customer obsession and employee obsession. I love hearing employees' stories and like this is the best place to work and that they're so thankful that they got a job at Sendoso. Meanwhile, actually, a couple of weeks ago, I was out up in Lake Tahoe on a boat, and everyone on the boat was a customer of Sendoso in some fashion, whether they were a user or a buyer. And I didn't even know that before. And like hearing people talk about my product or the product that we built and their love for it, once I shared with them that I was the CEO of Sendoso, like just makes my heart so happy that I've built a product and a service that other people love and use.
Love it. Love it. Lavie, wrap it up.
Sure.
What's the most rewarding thing for you?
Yeah. So it was interesting. I think, it was yesterday, and I'm like driving to work. I'm like, I love being home. I love being with my kids. I love being with my family. It's like the most amazing thing. And then I leave home and I come to work, and I'm like super excited to come to work because, I get to like deal with problems. I don't like only problems, but like challenges that like I could think through and kind of dissect and work through with like awesome people around me. And I just love doing that, and to do that towards the ultimate vision and the mission of what we're doing here, which we're changing people's lives. So that as a whole, to me, is just amazing to be able to do that. And I was talking to my wife, and like, people that don't have that, it's tough. Like people that don't have a great at home and don't have a great at work, it's really hard. And we need to be so thankful to to not only have our day job. To be, our day job's awesome and love what you do throughout your day, but you come home at night and you're just happy to be with the family. And so just, thankful for all of that. And that's about it.
Got the total package. Well, that's great stuff, guys. Very inspiring. Well, a friendly reminder to our audience that today's show, as always, is sponsored by Overpass.com. Are you looking to hire a team of remote sales professionals fast? There are thousands of highly qualified potential hires waiting for you on the Overpass Talent Marketplace. As the world's leading solution for hiring pre-vetted talent, Overpass makes building an unstoppable sales team quick and easy. Filter by experience and industry, interview, hire, and begin your onboarding process in as little as 2 days. Create your free account today at overpass.com. Well, panelists, today's conversation has been absolutely chock full of value. It's been a lot of fun, and I want to thank each of you personally for being with us today.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Kris, for coming on with us. Thanks, James. Much
Yeah,
appreciated.
it was great. It's good to meet all of you, and for everybody who joined.
All
Yeah,
right, and
stay
to our
tight, James.
listening audience as well, thanks again for being here. We'll see you next time on Evolve Sales Live. Take care, everybody.